welcome everybody, welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers. We are learning tonight Le'ilu Nishmat, Miriam Bat Bracha. Okay, so tonight's topic is about true love, or more importantly, the way to achieve it. As most people want it. Until earlier I thought everybody wanted it, but apparently only most people want it. But people strive for it. Sorry, I just had to. But it is important because it's not only the love that we're going to be speaking about tonight. It's not only interpersonal. It's also between you and God. So it is a very, very important topic. Now, this, with all interesting topics, what is important to realize is that you could find everything in the Torah. Everything that any topic that you need is in the Torah. The Zohar says that when God created the world, He said, He looked into the Torah and He created the world. Which means many people think that the world was created and then the Torah was sort of formed around it. It was the other way around. First came the Torah, then the world came into creation based on what was written in the Torah. So if the Torah, which is the blueprint of creation, if you want to know about anything and everything, it's all in there. You just have to know where to look and how to find it. We see this in Pirkei Avot also. Pirkei Avot in the 5th chapter, it says, Ben bagbag omer hafachba v'afachba dekulaba. Search in it, because everything is inside here. Everything that you could possibly think of is inside here. Everything, including the ahava, which is love. So, to understand this, we also have to figure out what is the definition of love, because I think most people have a very, very bad definition of love. There was once, depending on the day and stage that we are, there was once a guy that took out his wife for, the relationship wasn't that great, so he finally decided he's going to take her out, but he's pounding the beers. He's like chugging them one after another. And after he's like, nice and tipsy, he goes and he looks down and he says, I love you so much, and I can never live without you. And the woman's like, fanning her eyes, like, oh, that's so sweet. But then she's like, is that you talking, or is that the beer talking? So the guy looks up very confused. He's like, that's me talking to the beer. So many people have this very, very, twisted relationship that they even, if you ask people what defines love, what is love? So some wrong answers would be, love is the feeling that you get when you meet the right person. Absolutely not. Wrong. So that other people would say love is something that when you meet someone and he or she accomplishes or satisfies all your emotional needs. That's also not love. There was one article I read that love is never arguing. And I'm like, that is, but that is a very bad, this is like why we're so messed up. We don't even know what the definition of love is. There was once a guy who, his wife gave him a silent treatment for an entire week. The differences between men and women. You have a man sitting together with a bunch of other guys and they're driving. No one says a word. We're all cool. Like, there's no problem. Like, there's not an issue. If you're with like 4 girls in a car and it's just all women there and they're silent, and there's not someone talking within a period of 2 blocks, everyone's in their mind be like, okay, why is she upset at me? It's like, I don't know, why is she upset at me? What did she do to me? So the guy, she's giving him the silent treatment. He's like, of course he'll get it, but of course we never do. And after about, like a week, he goes over to him and be like, so you see, we're getting along pretty well lately. So we completely misunderstand the communication over here. So, not arguing is not being in love. Not arguing is not having a good relationship. And in fact, if you don't argue, then you're probably not in a relationship. So, that's a very hard glass to drink from. It looks nice, but it's like, let's go. So but there is also, when you look at people in the media, people that are very, very popular, like movie stars and things like that, what do they usually say? I love all my fans. My fans are these are my number ones. Like, you don't love all your fans. You don't care about them. If one of your fans goes and commits suicide, you're not going to go into the funeral and be like, I really appreciate everything that, you don't care. They don't really care. They just say, why do they care about them? Why do they like them so much? There's somebody that's going and constantly throwing compliments at you, constantly throwing my idol, I love you so much, you're so amazing. What's not to like about that? But do they actually have the love? There's no love. You can't say I love all my fans. You don't know all your fans. So when Yaakov goes and he works for Rachel, it says that he worked for her for 7 years, right? And we look at Bereshit chapter 29. And it says that when he worked for her 7 years, it was as if it was a few days. What does that mean? It's as if it was a few days. Because when somebody goes and when somebody has this strong emotional connection, the world is a different world. Colors are brighter, whatever, I'm spelling like, but whatever it is, it's a different world. You're a happier person. And this is very true. People, if you have a happy marriage, then you have a happy life. If you have a miserable marriage, no matter how much luxury you have in your life, it's not going to be that great unless you're finding things elsewhere. But assuming people are kosher, you're not dealing with that. So people usually ask, how do I know the love is real? This is a very, very common question that people get when they're dating. It's interesting to think about this because this never usually happens. No parent has ever came over to me and be like, how do I really know I love my child? It's just never a question. And if it is a question, then you have to go speak to somebody else, not me. But this is not a question. Why is that not a question? Because there's no question. You know that you love your child. There's no okay, how do I really know? One of the strongest love there is a love a parent to a child, and that's an unconditional love, a love that's not based on anything. The Rabbi Weinberg, he says, you want to try an interesting experiment. Don't try this, but he goes and he says, walk over to expectant mother and go over and be like, ask him a question. Start off with the question. First question number one is, hey, what's up? I see you're pregnant. That could go very terribly wrong. But assuming that she is pregnant, you say, hey, how do you know you're going to love the baby? So, actually, the better yet, rephrase it like this. It says, are you going to love this baby? And the mother will be like, of course I'll love it. Be like, but what about if it's such a brat? Like the kids down the block that just drive you crazy? What about if your kid is like one of those? So I'll give you one of two answers. Number one is my kid will never be like that. Come on. And number two is, even if he is like that, I'm going to love him anyways. So then, they usually, a mother would not say, well, we'll have the child, we'll get to know him or her, and we'll see. And based on his personality, how cute he is, we'll see if we want to keep him or not. That's not usually a response from a normal, healthy parent. And in fact, you never get, I think we mentioned this before, you never get this you hear a parent go over to a 6-month-old baby, and you go, listen, baby, we need to talk. And she sits him down in front of her and says, listen, it's not you, it's me. It's just not something that I signed up for, waking up every 3 hours, way more than I anticipated, going to the bathroom way too much. I think we should see other people. That usually doesn't happen. Why does that not happen? Because they love somebody unconditionally. What does a baby give in return besides a little, when they smile, the whole world goes crazy. What does the baby give in that? It's not what you're anticipating or you're expecting in return, but rather, you heard my comment, didn't you? Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. It's just like my whole face has to get inside here. But it's good though. I think it's meant for wine that you don't drink too much. No. Okay.
Maybe.
Here I can drink, huh? Okay, thank you. So where was I? Okay, so now the first time the Torah speaks about, not the first time, let's go before we go with that. When the Torah speaks about love, what does it say about love? It says, you have to love your friend as if yourself, which means is that when you love a person, their happiness is as important to you as your happiness. And you know what that person needs, where that person is hurting, you know everything about them, as if it was yourself. There was once a story in this sleepaway camp. So in sleepaway camp, when you send the kids away and the parents have vacation, so that they go to visit their children, usually every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks is a visiting day. So they, one time it was visiting day, and the head counselor, the rabbi, said, listen, I want everybody to make sure, this is boy camp, so, make sure you shower before this day, and make sure you clean it up, make sure everything, and he said, very important, when your parents come, don't just jump in like, what did you bring me? Says, this is your chance. You haven't been able to do the kibbud avayim. Now you have the chance, the ability to do kibbud avayim. So first, show them respect, show them some honor, and then ask them what they got for you. So all the boys were very excited, a bunch of young kids, and they were all waiting outside by the parking lot, waiting for the parents to roll in. And slowly, cars kept on coming in, and kept on getting the kids. The kids showed them all the amenities and all the the cool pool and the gym and all the go-karts, and everything was amazing. And people came, people left. And then the head counselor kept on looking, and he saw that there was one, kid by the name of Shmuley, one 10-year-old boy that was just sitting by the rock, by the parking lot, and he saw that, his parents weren't coming yet. It was getting late. So he walks over to the boy and he says, Shmuley, he says, are you waiting for your parents? And he says, yeah, they're supposed to be coming. And he says, oh, okay, fine, sounds good. And he kept on, head counselor went, was doing was that he had to do. And every about 15 minutes, he kept on, going back. And he saw the boy is still there. And he, started, it was getting late, it didn't look too bright for him. So the head counselor knew this particular boy was he was like a loner. He never had really much friends, and he was always like roaming around, and he didn't really, so it made it all the more painful. So then he went over to the boy again. He says, "Are you sure your parents are coming?" And the boy says, "Yeah, they're probably just stuck in traffic. They're definitely coming." So he said, "Fine." 2 hours later, and he's still sitting over there. He still had his hopes up. 3 hours go by. Finally, the rabbi kept on checking him every 15 minutes, and his heart broke. He says, "Listen, do you want maybe come back to my bungalow, and you could come around with me?" And he says, "No, my parents are going to come. I don't want to miss them." So after about 3-4 hours of him waiting there and no one showing up, he puts his head down in shame, and he makes his way to the bunk. The head counselor says, "Listen, it's terrible, but at least he's, coming to terms with it." But about 15 minutes later, he goes to check on him in the bunk, and he peeks in through the window, and he sees that the boy his head is buried in the pillow, and he's bawling, crying. And this is like, it really broke his heart. And he says, "What am I supposed to tell him? I'm going to go in there?" But he says, "What am I supposed to do?" So he leaves, and he's going to come back again in another, keep on checking him every another 15 minutes. He goes out. He comes back in another 15 minutes, and he sees that the boy is no longer in the bed. So he felt good. Maybe he's getting out. Kids get over things very quickly. So he feels good about it. And then he sees something that he freezes the rabbi, and he sees there was another kid that sort of was taking something from under this guy Shmuley's pillow. And the guy got so angry after all that this kid went through today, and his parents didn't come in. So he barges into the room, and he says, his name was Avi. He says, "Avi, what are you doing over here?" And the kid, little 10-year-old, just jumped. And he's like, I start stammering. He's like, nothing. He's like, I saw your hand under his pillow. He's like, "What were you doing?" He says, No, I'm serious. I wasn't doing anything. And he's starting turning, beet red, and he's starting to, get scared, the kid. And the kid says, I wasn't stealing. The first thing that he says, I wasn't stealing anything. So he goes over, the rabbi walks over to him and he says, "Avi, tell me, what were you doing then, if you weren't stealing?" So, he sees, Avi was holding a package. So, he's turning red, Avi, he's turning white, he's turning all different colors, and he's nervous. And then, the rabbi goes and takes the bag that he was holding, and he turns it over, and he sees there was a note on it. And it says, "Dear Shmuley, sorry we couldn't make it today. Love, mommy and daddy." So they, realize now what the head counselor looks at this kid Avi, and he says, "You want to explain to me what's going on over here?" So the kid is so nervous that he's getting in trouble. He's like, "I'm so sorry." He says, "When my parents came, I saw Shmuley waiting for his parents by the rock, and when my parents came back, I saw Shmuley still waiting by the parents for the rock. So I realized that he didn't come yet. So I figured I'm going to make him a package and pretend to be that it was from his parents." He says, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do anything wrong." And the head counselor is like, with tears in his eyes, he's like, "I've never seen in my whole life such a selfless act, let alone from a 10-year-old kid." And he says, "Don't worry." I says, "You put it back." And he says, "I'm sure you're going to make Shmuley very happy." And he says, "And you made your father in heaven extremely, extremely happy today." To love somebody is not only to know where that person hurts, but also to anticipate it and to alleviate that pain somehow. That love doesn't have to only be between a husband and a wife. A love could be between anybody. You have to, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha doesn't say only you have to love your wife. You have to love every single person as if it is yourself. The first mention of love in the Torah is between Yitzchak and Rivka. In Genesis chapter 24, verse 67, and it says that Yitzchak brought her to the tent of Sarah, and he took Rivka, and she became his wife, and then he loved her. It doesn't say he loved her, and then he took her to a tent. When did the love come? The love came after the marriage. The love came out. He didn't even know her before she got married. Like many, many grandparents, the guys sitting over here, they didn't. They had arranged marriage, and this is who you're going to marry. The love comes afterwards. The love is not based on something that was beforehand, but rather it's coming after. Now, the question is, how do you get to that? How do you get to that love? So, I want to share with you something from Rabbi Dessler. But before we get there, in Hebrew, love is ahava. Ahava is the numerical value of 13, which is the same numerical value as echad, which is 1. Ahava is the same numerical value as 1. To love someone is, like we said before, to be one with them. But if you look at the root of ahava is to have, is to give. A very big fundamental in love. If you want to love somebody, there's a very secret component that you just have to give that person. He says says Rabbi Dessler, he says, if let's say you go to a parent and you do a study, he says, why do parents want to have children? Although we know according to the how you have to have children, you have to bring children into the world, but why do non-Jewish parents, let's say for example, why do they want to have children? So he says for 2 reasons. Number one, there is for the continuity. When a person dies, if they feel like they left over something, it makes all that death a little bit easier, and you're able to continue the name of the family or whatever it is that you prefer to continue. But he says the second one, which is stronger than the first one, is the fact that we need to lavish our love and affection on somebody. Like a human tendency is that we have love and we need to give it over. And how do we give it over? Where do we go for this? This usually happens by, through children. This is either when people don't have children, people, usually lavish this onto animals, to pets. Which is why I want to digress a little bit on pets for now. So, it's a little bit of my pet peeve, but
Pun intended.
I didn't even get it. Very good. So the there was people have there's like, you go to a pet store, you have like classical pets, like the classics. You get the fish, the turtles, the birds, you get the cats, the dogs, the regular. Every once in a while you have somebody who has like, a tarantula, because you have some emotional issues. I'm just joking. If you know anybody who has a tarantula, it's fine. Or a snake, because they like, people to, see somebody get, like them kill a mouse or something like that. But generally, if you ask somebody who is a pet lover and who has many pets, and you ask them, which pet do you love the most? Let's say they have one of everything. What animal do you think would come as the most? Thank you. Oh, very good. Wow. Did you say also dog? Okay. Yeah. So the answer is dog. They made a study on it, and the answer was a dog. Now the question is why? Why is a dog the most lovable out of all, or whatever it is?
The human.
So let's see. So that's.
Because it does everything for the human, loyal for him.
Very good. So it is loyal, right? And it doesn't give attitude like a cat. That's true. But let's first see what science says, and then let's see what the Torah says. Now the Torah goes and says, why people love dogs? No, because dogs wasn't Abraham didn't have a pet dog, that he called Poochie, and he said every time he went for a walk, right? Rather, it's something that's common out. But you don't have the big tzaddikim that they don't waste their time. They don't have time to waste on a dog. But let's look at it. What the science says on a dog. So there was an article written by John Archer. He was the head of the Department of Psychology in Preston in the University of the United Kingdom. So he brings there's extreme examples on how much people love their dogs. And there was even one case where he brings down there was a legal dispute on the custody of the dog. So there's a couple that divorced, and who's going to go keep the dog? There was also another case where a dog was the designated best man at a wedding. There is also. And I don't know if you've seen it online. There's also somebody who put a bar mitzvah for a dog. It's a dog's bar mitzvah. So people go really, really crazy on these, on the animal. Now, and the evidence from science shows that the people have relationship to pets similar to those that they have relationship with children. And they even treat them like children. They play with them like children. They even do something called baby talk. They speak to them like children, which they come home. It's very creepy. You come home and be like, where's mommy's baby? Where's mommy's baby? And you come over here and you pick up this dog and you're like, come on, give mommy a kiss. And this dog is licking your face up, and this dog just gave himself a sponge bath, and you're like, oh, this is my dog. I love it. And they consider the dogs part of the family. Now, I don't mean to insult or hurt anybody who have any dog over here. That's not my intention by any means, way, or form. I just want to try to bring that a point across. So I hope I don't insult anybody. I've seen them in strollers. It was very disturbing. You're walking your dog in a stroller. Baby thing. Yeah. So
recently, because of the subway thing, have you guys seen how people put gigantic dogs in bags just so that they can bring them?
Oh, I didn't.
Because now there's that subway rule. Unless it fits in a bag, you can't bring it on them.
So they bring like a duffel bag?
Oh my God.
So they have a... All right, my Doberman is just so you know. All right, anyways, so... But even more, they consider the pet part of the family. They have pictures of the pet. It comes into all the all the vacations.
My parents' house.
Yeah, there you go. So, but if you look at what science says, they're baffled by it. They don't understand this. They consider pets are like parasites because they don't contribute. They don't offer anything to humans in return, and they just take everything. They just they need this, they need attention, they need food. So they're like parasites, but yet humans love them unconditionally. What's going on? They could rip up your entire couch, and they could rip up everything. At the end of the day, you're still gonna love them. So they even did a research for actually several decades. The science thought that it was good for humans' physical and mental health to have a pet. And then in 2009, they did a study in Sweden of nearly 40,000 people. So it's like a real study, not like 50 people from the old age home be like, hey, you want $50? So this is like a serious study, 40,000 people that with pet owners, and they did a study and they saw that the pet owners suffered more mental health problems than their non-pet owners, pet owning peers. So you see over here, like, so what benefit actually comes out from owning a pet? There's a guy by the name of Clive Wine. He's the director of the canine science in Arizona State University. So he has a whole interesting article, and he brings down over there. He says when he's very intellectual, and his wife was, I think, an engineer, very intellectual, and they adopted a dog. And when they adopted a dog, all of a sudden, like a few months later, his wife came over and said, maybe we should have more kids. That this somehow connected her to wanting to have more kids. And there was one scientist who finishes all his research on like why we love dogs. He says like this, and he says, maybe that's, I'm going to quote, maybe that's all there is to it. Humans are just programmed to love soft and helpless things. This is the big scientists. This is where they came out to it. But I want to tell you a conclusion that's based off the Torah on why people have a strong connection to the dogs more than the other pets. It's because one thing that you have to constantly do to your dog more than anything else is that you give your dog way more than anything else. You have to walk your dog needs attention, you have to play with your dog. You're constantly giving your dog. Your cat, you put some food in it doesn't have to see you for a week, it doesn't care about you. As long as it's got a little scratch tower and it's got its thing that it walks around, it's fine. It's got a little mouse to play with, it's good. A dog, if it doesn't see you, what does a dog do the second you leave the house? It sits by the door and waits for you to come home. Right? It just waits for you to come home and needs you, and you have to go and give it attention, and you have to go walk it, and you have to go feed it, and you have to constantly do to it. It's like a baby. So what happens when you're constantly giving to someone, and you're constantly giving to something, you build a strong emotional connection to it. Not the fact, people, this is something that's unbelievable, because I wanted to do research on this. I wanted to do research why humans love dogs. Why humans, I want to know the reasons behind what science says before I go into, thing. But even, it doesn't even say, how hard it was for me to find an article? Everything was, how do we know the dogs love us? That's what we care. Everything was, how do you know your dog loves you? Who do you think loves you more, your cat or your dog? All these like lists and lists of studies. I'm like, what do humans care about? Look how selfish we are. Like even when we're giving that, we just want to make sure that you're giving me something in return. Do you love me? And how do I know? It's like the cosmopolitan test. Make sure your husband loves you. Like these mission. And please, if anybody is married, stay away from all that nonsense. Do not go and be like, well, let's see if we're compatible after you're 10 years married. Stay away from those things. I recently heard about what people go through this and be like, well, it told us we weren't compatible. Who told you? Who? It was a 25-year-old, somebody who just decided to make this questionnaire based on her, emotional situation that she just broke up with her boyfriend. Now, people half the country are deciding that they're not together with. Well, what is this based off with? So, how do I even get to that? Okay, but anyways, I don't know.
Looking for the studies.
Yeah. So which shows you how much people, all they care about is just what's coming into me. I'm going to love you, but I want to make sure you're going to love me in return. That's not true love. And we're going to get to that in a second. But says Rab Dessler, let's go. By the way, this is not Rab Dessler. Rab Dessler did not bring this whole door. That is all my I can say it's my fault, whatever it is. I'm just trying to bring out a point. And again, I have no mean or intent to harm or offend anybody who has a pet animal. You're halakhically allowed to have these things. It's not a problem. Just to bring out some point in it. And I'll tell you some even something even a little bit stronger. There was one time I was walking. I said the story once before. I was walking one time and I saw like a guy, in an emotionally weird situation. And so I went over to it. It was a long story. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I went over to it. I started speaking to it. I'm one of those weird guys. I'd be like, are you okay? Not like our regular New Yorkers who just like, walk off. So, and I'm talking to this guy, and then he starts bawling, crying, like literally like a baby crying on the floor. Literally, he's sitting on the floor. He was crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, is that what happened? And I'm like listing off like what happened. I'm like, you're okay. You're sick. Your family. What? And then I'm listing off through like the big things, and then finally I got like, did you lose a loved one? And he couldn't even talk, like the saliva going out from all orifices. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, and I'm like, I'm trying to make conversation to see where, maybe I can, offer him some emotional support or whatever it is. And I'm like, was it a parent? I'm thinking, is he crying like this? I'm like, no, like a sibling, maybe your wife, like, but what was it? So finally he's able to mutter, it was my dog. And I remember thinking, I'm done. Yeah, I'm sorry. I could usually speak to anybody and everybody, but I don't even know what to say. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give it another shot. And I said, did it like just die? Like today? Like what? How? And he's like, no, a month ago. And I'm like, I'm sorry. There's nothing more that I could offer you at this point in time. I think it's, we're just about done over here. But I'm not saying that you can't mourn. Obviously, it's part of your relationship. But look how close people get to their pets. They get so close to them that it's such an emotional strain that when a pet dies. And I'm not saying that's a wrong thing. Obviously, you're going to get emotionally attached to it because you're constantly giving to it. You're constantly doing stuff for it. And that's why when your goldfish, dies versus when your dog dies, it makes two different things. The goldfish, you put in, food a few times a week and you're good. And as opposed to a dog, you have to give constantly more. So going back to now Rabbi Dessler. Rabbi Dessler says, he goes like this. It says, so there's giving and there's love. Is giving a consequence of love, or is love the result of giving? Like what drives what? Do you love somebody and that's why you give them? Or do you give them and that's why you love them? So he goes on to explain. It says the reason why you love somebody is because you give them. If you want to love somebody, you give them. And he brings this up from a proof from the Torah. The Torah goes down and says that there's certain people, there's certain categories of men that are permitted to leave, to return home before battle and not go to war. And of the three categories, there's somebody who built a new house and he did not consecrate it, somebody who planted a vineyard, did not redeem it, or somebody that wed a woman and did not bring her into his house yet. Those people are able to, they say, anybody over here, any of this list, you guys go home, you're absolved from staying, to fight over here. Now, what does these three have in common? The three things that have in common, because you think about it, you have here a woman and then you have a house and a vineyard. Like, what is one thing after one is a human and one is that? But the things that they have in common is when you emotionally invest into something, especially your work, it means a lot to you, and it's constantly going to be in your mind. You're not going to be able to go into the fighting. You have this, and you need to take care of this. So, says Rabbi Dessler, it says the love that we bear to the fruit of our labors, is directly comparable to the love that we have between a man and his wife, because we are constantly given. You have to work for the house. You have to work for the field, for the vineyard. And Rav Dessler also brings down a story that he says that he personally observed. That he says it was the war, and there was a husband and a wife, and a little baby boy. And the wife was away for some given point in time, and the Germans came in. So the father and the boy, they had to escape. So they were separated. The husband and wife separated from each other, and the husband was always with the boy, and the wife was by herself. After the war, they came and they became reunited. But where was who had a stronger loving relationship? Was obviously the father and the child. Why was it stronger? Not because they spent more time together and they got to know each other in a better, more personal relationship, but rather because the father was constantly giving to this boy. Where the mother, even though she loved this boy very much and she constantly wanted to be with this boy, but at the same point in time, she wasn't there. She missed this opportunity to give it. Now, obviously, it wasn't her fault, but at the same point in time, the love of the father had for the son was much greater than the love of the mother had for the son as when they became reunited. So it says Rav Dessler, and he goes on and he says, why do we find so often that husbands and wife, their affection does not seem to last? It's usually good in the beginning, and then, it sort of like goes downhill. So he says that in the beginning of a relationship, people are generally are going to be givers. They're notified as they're going to give in the beginning of a relationship. They'll give, and they want to make the other person happy, and they'll date them, and this is very, very important. By the way, dating should start when you're married. Now, I mean, you date your spouse, not dating other people. But you're supposed to date your people think, okay, now that I finally got married, I don't have to. No, just the opposite. Now it's when you have to start dating. Because what happens when you're dating? You're constantly trying to impress the other person. You're constantly trying, open the doors, and you're saying, you're complimenting, and this and that. And then finally you get married and be like, all right, let's go. Oh, you want to go out? Fine, I'll go out already. All right, where do you want to go? And it's like, where do you want to go? And it's like, come on already. It's just that when you're dating, when you're after you get married, that's when dating is supposed to start. That's when you're actually supposed to go. But in general, people are usually givers. But when? In the dating process. But once after you get married, it turns into they become givers. Now, why do they become givers? Because that's how generally people are. Now, once you become a giver and once you become a taker and you're not a giver anymore, the relationship is going to go down. There was once, Mr. Katz, who was very, very ill, and he was literally in the hospital all, day in and day out. And, the doctor's looking at the chart, and he goes to Mrs. Katz and says, Mrs. Katz, do you mind, can I speak to you outside for a moment? And she says, yeah, of course, doctor. So she goes down, she's like, what's going on? How's my husband? How's everything? So the doctor's shaking his head. He says, listen, it doesn't look good for your husband. He says, the only slight chance of survival that he possibly has is that you have to, treat him like the best. You have to wait on him hand and foot. Everything that he wants, you have to give him. You have to, his favorite foods, you're going to have to cook it for him. Everything that he wants, he cannot have zero stress. You have to constantly give him. So, and he says, if not, then I don't know what's going to be. So she says, I understand, doctor, thank you very much. She comes back in, so Mr. Katz goes over to his wife, Mrs. Katz, and says, he sees a worried face and says, what did the doctor tell you? So she shook her head and she says, you're going to die. Because she's not able to go, I'm going to have to give up my confidence now, and I have to go and work, and I have to go do that. And like, no, I'm not willing for that. Now it says, I'd rather you die than have to do that.
Wow.
All right, well, time. Okay, so, all right. Let it out. It's good. Let it out. All right. Let's take it a step further. All right. So, we're good? All right.
I'm worried about the next thing you're about to say.
Right. No, this is not going to be so bad.
Okay.
So, we just spoke about love. Let's take this a step further into something called true love. By the way, true love, you don't have, in the Torah, it doesn't say, there's love and there's true love. It's only in the English text, because love is love. Love is, the right way it's supposed to be. So, there's something that is called unconditional love, which you touched upon before. Unconditional love is that you love that person regardless of whatever that person has to give back to you. You love it regardless. An easiest example is a love from a parent to a child. So there was once a story that was brought down, and it's actually, I'll tell you before that, a 2-sentence story before I get into this story. There was once a note that was found in one of the bunks in the Holocaust, and it says, God, parentheses, next line, written properly. And he says, you can take away my business, you can take away my money, you can take away my wife, you can take away my kids. But there's one thing that you'll never take away from me, and that's my love to you. That's like sign. And this guy, obviously, this is what he kept her, she kept on with him throughout the entire Holocaust, to constantly read that, to constantly, have that strong connection with God. So there was once a 14-year-old boy who started rebelling against his parents. And it got worse and worse and worse. By 16, he ran away from home. And it's been 4 days, and the parents haven't heard back from him. He didn't come home, and parents are going to be worried, sick. A 14-year-old, what is it now, 16-year-old kid going outside alone. Where's he sleeping? How's he staying? Where is he? Is he alive? Like, what's going on? How's he eating? So 4 days pass by, and they get a phone call, and it's their son. And the father gets on the phone. He says, "Are you crazy?" He says, "Do you know what you put us to? Do you even realize what your mother and your father are going through right now? We're worried sick. Are you alive? You couldn't even call to tell us, that I'm alive. I'm okay." He says, "You know what you're putting us through? This is terrible." The boy hears this, click, hangs up the phone. The guy, so the father's like pacing back and forth, like, people get upset. He's like, "What am I going to do?" And so he's going crazy, and he's like, but 2 days go by and still no phone call. So now he's getting nervous. Now he's getting, now he feels maybe he overreacted. So he goes to Rabbi. He goes to Rabbi Diamond. This is written. Rabbi Diamond wrote it in one of his books about dating, I believe it was. And he goes and he says, the father goes and presents the situation. He says, "Listen, this is what happened. This is, what am I supposed to do?" So Rabbi Diamond goes to him and he says, "Listen," he says, "I am not, familiar with the whole situation, but based on what you told me right now, I think I know why your son ran away." And he says, "Well, why did my son, why did he rebel?" He says, it's very simple. He says, all that he sees is his parents, all they care about is themselves. And they don't even care about him. He says, what happens after 4 days? He says, figures, listen, I haven't gotten any attention from my parents. What I'll do, I'll leave my house. Then my parents will have no other choice but to think of me nonstop. And then we'll see. And then he calls up and he says, "Okay, now let's see if you thought about me, if you have any, you're only thinking only about yourself." And when he picks up the phone and he calls you up, what does he hear? You heard what you did to us and how you made us feel, and do you even realize what we're going through, and do you even know what you're doing to your parents? All he hears is, again, about me, 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 me. Of course he's going to hang up the phone, because that's not what he's looking for. He's looking for some attention. He's looking for some love, that you actually care about him more than you care about yourself. So the rabbi goes over to the father and says, "This is what I want you to do. The next time that he calls, you tell him as following. You say, 'We miss you, we love you, we're waiting for you, please come home.' That's it." And the father started arguing. He says, "No." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Do you think he's going to run away? Is he just going to get away with that?" And so they were arguing back and forth. Finally, after a long argument, the father said, "Fine, you know what, I'll try it." So he did that. A few days later, the boy called back again. And he said, he held his tongue. And he says, "We love you, we miss you, we want you, can you please come home?" That night, the boy came home. So he says, there are many things that what we do, and when we're loving something, we want something back in return. That's not something that's a conditional love. You want real love, true love. That's something that is unconditional. We see this in Pirkei Avot. That says that kol ahava she'itluya b'davar. If you have love that is dependent on something, then batel davar, batel ahava. Once the love goes away, the thing goes away, the love goes away. The easiest example, which I give often, is if, let's say, a man marries a woman only because of her looks. Like, that's it. That's as far as it gets. The second that the look starts fading a little bit, the love is done. If a woman goes and marries a husband only because of the money, that's it. She has absolutely no connection to him. Then the second that there's some money problems, or the second that there's some issues, the love is done as well. So if you're marrying somebody or you're loving somebody conditional under some sort of aspect, the second that that aspect is gone, the love is gone. And the Pirkei Avot goes and he brings you a very, very simple example. It gives you an example. This is, I love. Let's say if you're doing a mathematic, let's say you're taking calculus in, college. So you have, usually the way that it works in math is that they'll give you the problem in sort of a textual format. They'll say, this is the problem. But then most people cannot, like 90% of the people cannot comprehend what that is until they see an example of it. They have to say, okay, now that you have that idea, now here's an example of solve for x, however it is, it works. They'll be like, oh yeah, now I get it. So the Torah also tell you that. They gave you the thing. It says love that's dependent on something, love that is not going to last, love that's not dependent on anything that's going to last. And it gives you an example. The example that is dependent on something is the love for Amnon and Tamar. Amnon and Tamar, their father was David, but they shared different mothers. So they were half siblings. And Amnon had a very, very strong desire for his half-sister. And he, in a certain way that whatever, he pretended to be sick, and then she came and she served him, and then he had his way with her, and then afterwards the Torah says that from that, the hatred that he had was greater than the love that he had for her. Which means that he never had any love for her. All he cared was about himself. He wanted to satisfy his own needs. The second that he satisfied his own needs, that's it. The love and everything else went away.
So he hated her?
So he hated her, yeah. Very sad story. After that, Shalom went and he killed Amnon for that as revenge.
David HaMelech kid?
Yeah. So then it says, what's love that is not dependent on anything? It gives you the story of love between David and Yonatan. Yonatan was the son of King Shaul, and David, Yonatan, he was going to be next in king. And then there was a question, maybe it was going to be David. Yonatan went and he hid David. He saved basically David's life in order that he doesn't die, even though that came at the expense of him being the next king. So you can see that is love that's not dependent on anything. That is dependent, that's unconditional. It says, all I care about is I care about you and I want to make sure that you're okay, even though he was going to lose out of it. So there is a very, very, an amazing story that, true story from the Holocaust, that there was a small city in Poland that it was in the early 1930s that there was a Jewish dentist by the name of Dr. Daniel, I forgot his last name, and he was the town dentist. He lived in a predominantly Christian area, so he had both Jewish patients and non-Jewish patients. And he was besides being a good dentist, people came to him to just, for some odd reason, for a dentist, you can have conversations. You walk into your primary care physician and be like, "Hey, what's wrong?" Okay, then a dentist, right? Of course, they ask you, and they speak to you. They speak to you there, and then you start talking. But please don't talk when my hands are in your mouth, And then they ask you, "So how's everything?" So, but there's a conversation, so you get some sort of an emotional connection to the dentist more than to other doctors. So, he built a sort of emotional connection to his patients, both Christians and Jews alike. And his wife was she had like this Aryan look, blonde hair, blue eyes, also very charismatic. She, after she earned her advanced degree in education, she went to open up a Jewish kindergarten. And, so they Baruch Hashem, they were obviously very successful, and they had an unbelievable marriage. Like literally, like when he would work late in the office, she would cook him supper at home. Wouldn't wait till she comes home. She would travel to his office and go, and they would eat. Then they would go on the side. They would eat supper. They would eat anything over there. And she constantly, whatever it is that she could do to make his life easier, that's what she would do. And he reciprocated in that. He constantly bought her gifts according to his abilities, and flowers and jewelry and compliments, everything. It was mamash an unbelievable marriage. There was only, unfortunately, one thing that they didn't have is that they weren't able to have any children as of yet. So things were going well until Germany invaded Poland in the year 1939, and the Germans, when they first came in, so the Jews still had their businesses and they still had that, and the Germans were they were stealing everything, the delicacies, and they were just gobbling up the liquor and the sweets, and eventually they had some tooth problems, and they looked around to find a good dentist, and they realized that one of the best dentists around is a Jew. So they didn't want to go to a Jew, but they figured he's so good, so they started going to this to this Jew. And again, he started, he worked, for them, and he started, building a small connection with them. And through this connection that he had with his patients, he was actually able to go and intervene on the behalf of the Jewish people. So this went well all until there's something that happened that he tried to intervene and he couldn't intervene. There was once a group of Jews that were they were captured, they were arrested for some fake crime that they didn't commit, and they were their destiny was that they needed to go and get hung. And not only that, they're going to get hung in the town square, and everybody has to come and watch. So they forced everybody to come and watch, and before they put they get them on the gallows, and before they actually do anything, they go and they look around. And for some reason, the guy in charge pointed at this Dr. Daniel, and he says, "You come up here." So he's looking around. He says, okay. So he gets up and he says, "Put the noose on their necks." So the Nazis, so sadistic, they made the Jews kill also the other Jews. So he was a religious man, and he says, "I'm sorry, I can't do that." And he says, "You better put the noose on their necks, or it's going to be on your neck soon." And he says, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that." So he started, they get really, really angry. If the Nazis saw that the Jews were not listening, they got furious. He started screaming. He says, "Get this dog out of here." He says, "Go take," and he started getting so angry. Some 2 soldiers came up and they're like, "We'll take care of it." And he says, "You take him to the woods and you shoot him there." He says, "Better yet, make him dig his own grave." And he says, "Aye, aye, Captain." And they take him out. They take him, they cuff him, whatever. They walk him out. As he's walking out, he scans the crowd to find his wife, and their eyes lock in. And they sort of had, basically he knew he was going to his death, and this was their last time they were going to see each other. And they had this emotional, connection that they sort of said goodbye without any words, actually. And both their eyes filled with tears. But she held really strong, and he kept on walking. They get to the outskirts of the town, and the soldiers looked left and right, and the guy realized, he says, these are the two patients. Both of them are his patients, and they say, "Listen, we're not going to kill you." He says, we're gonna dig this grave. You're gonna lie in this grave over here, and at nighttime, go into the forest. There's the partisans over there, the Jewish forces that would go and try to fight against the German Nazis. So he says, go and see if you could reunite with them, but you can never ever show your face back in this town again, because you're going to be considered a dead man. So he says, "Fine, thank you very much." So they dug he dug the grave. They shot 2 times in the ear, and they walked back. And meanwhile, he's sitting over there in the grave waiting till nightfall. Meanwhile, the entire crowd heard the gunshots, and including his wife. And the wife, the people around her saw that she literally every muscle in her bone tensed up, but no emotion. She literally kept it together. And by when nighttime comes in, he gets out of the grave and he starts, he runs into the forest, and he's literally running for days on end. He couldn't find anybody, not a soul. Days on end, no food, no water. Finally, he feels like he's going to pass out, and he sees this cottage in the middle of the forest. So he goes and he says, "You know what? Nazi, not Nazi, German, I don't care. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen." He goes and he knocks on the door, and the guy opens up. This guy's literally half dead, and he's quickly brings him in, and he tells him the whole story. He says, "Listen, I'm a Jew. I ran away. Can you please help me?" And he says, and this guy happened to be one of the the good non-Jews at the time, and he went and he started not only that, he gave him food and he gave him water, and basically gave him a place to sleep. And he says, "Listen, sleep here tonight. Yeah, obviously I can't let you stay over here, but I'll point you to the direction where all the Jews are hanging out in the forest." So he goes, he sleeps there, he feels a little bit rejuvenated, and he points him in the direction where all the Jews are in the forest. They go over there, and once they get, he gets reunited with all his fellow, Jews. He sees, not only that, they even recognized him from his, back in town, and they were so happy. First of all, because their teeth were already getting rotten, so now they have a dentist out there, because they were living in the forest. So they said, so he actually then opened up a second thriving practice, and this time it was in the forest. But besides being a dentist for all his fellow brothers and sisters over there, he also went and he also became one of the fighters. He was a young guy, and he was able. So he became the active acts of whatever they were doing against the Germans. And several times he almost got captured. Several times he almost got killed. Somehow always miraculously getting out of it. And throughout this entire ordeal, he lasted there 5 years. 5 years he was in the forest over there. And throughout the entire time, there was one thing that was constantly in his mind, and that was his wife. His wife's name was Eliza. Constantly, nonstop on his mind, his wife. And he was constantly praying for her, and, please God, keep her safe, let him be reunited. This is constantly the one thing that was going on for him. Then, but when he when he met all the Jews, he realized that he never told the soldiers, be like, listen, tell my wife that I'm not dead. That you say, he never told them that. He's like, did they tell her? He says, I don't know, maybe they told her, maybe they didn't tell her. The truth was they didn't tell her. I didn't tell her, and she mourned. She mourned for her husband's death, even though that he wasn't dead, for 5 years. And after the Germany was liberated, the first thing that people did is go to see for their fellow survivors, and he went to search. The first thing that he went to do is check for Elisa. He kept on looking one after another, all the forms, and he couldn't find her in the alive section. Now he was getting really nervous and started crying. He went into the deceased section, and she's not there either. So he became really confused. She's not here. He searched high and low, and he made a vow. He says, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find out what happened to my wife. This is his beloved wife that constantly throughout the entire 5 years, this is all that he thought about. So, after he saw that, after searching and searching, he saw that he couldn't find anything. He decided he's going to go to Israel, and he joined the Haganah. The Haganah later it turned out to turn into the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. But before that, it was known as the Haganah. So he joined the Haganah, and he, being that he had 5 years of fighting experience, he actually fit very, very well over there, and. He used this opportunity to go and search for, he had a lot more connections now, so he would constantly search for his wife, Elisa, see where she is. So the way that he generally went is he went generally people have their highs and lows. When he was high, he was good, but then sometimes he fell into this almost a depression. It's been so long. What's with my wife? Where is she? And during these times, he opened up his trusty Tehillim. He opened up his Tehillim, and the way that it worked every time when he felt this emotional breakdown coming, he would go and say verse by verse, and as his eyes filled with tears and he couldn't see anymore from the tears that in his eyes, he finished quickly the rest of the chapter of Tehillim. He put the Tehillim in his eye, covered his face, and then he just started bawling, crying, and having a conversation with God. That's all. He started talking to God. He says, please God, he says, you got to help me out over here. He says, listen, he says, all my friends that came back over here, they threw religion away. He says, I kept it over here. I kept it. I'm trying to hold on strong, but I'm begging you, please throw me a bone. He says, please help me find my beloved wife. I cannot go on without her. And he says, and then with a pause, he added, he says, it's been a while. He says, at least let me find closure. And with that, he came for another fresh set of tears. His captain, he saw one of his best men, going through these emotional bouts. So, there was a mission that came in, and he figured, what? This guy is going to be the perfect one. Anytime that there was some sort of mission in Europe or that, he sent him right away. Because this way, at least he'll get him out of there, get his mind off it. And additionally, it'll help him start looking for, maybe he can find something about information on his wife. So there was a mission that came in, and the mission was there was 3 children in an orphanage, and they were stuck in a Christian orphanage that needed to be rescued. So they needed 2 people. So he said right away, Daniel, he's going to be number 1. And then they went and he went and he picked up somebody else, one of his Daniel's friend Mordechai, to go along with them. And they briefed them on the mission. The mission is you're going to go into this Christian orphanage somewhere in Poland, and you are going to be pretending to be British newspaper editors, and you're writing an article on post-war something, about the orphanages and things something along those lines. And they gave them passports of British passports. They gave them everything. So they went and they made their way. Out. So. Meanwhile, let's pause the story over here. Let's go back to what happened with his wife. His wife, Elisa, after that she heard the gunshots, she started mourning for her husband. She realized that her husband, passed away, and she's going to have to move on with her life. A few days go by, and she walks into her apartment, and she sees there's an envelope on the table. So she goes and she opens up the envelope, and in the envelope, she sees a false Polish passport. And with it included, there's the genealogical history of her, of her complete pure Polish ancestry, and there's there was a wad of a small amount of money over there, basically a ticket for her out. So she goes over and she runs right away to the rabbi. She says, Rabbi, what am I supposed to do? She says, I have all my children in the kindergarten that she runs. She says, I can't just leave them. She says, but I have a way out. So the rabbi says, listen, he says, the halacha is that your life comes first. If you have a way to save your life, save your life. And says, you never know, go out, maybe you'll be able to actually save some Jews. So she went, she took the rabbi's advice, and she left. She left, and she went to a place, I think, near Czechoslovakia. And she went over there, and she actually was no problem. She got out safely and smoothly, and she went to enroll to become a teacher in a Christian orphanage. And she goes over there, and she's working in this orphanage as a teacher. And she realizes that there are 3 children that stick out amongst all the other children. And, everybody else was the blonde hair, blue eyes, and there's black eyes, black hair going on. And she goes over, and she constantly had her eye on those, there's something's wrong over here. One time she was asked to bathe the little, it was a boy and 2 girls. She one time was asked to bathe the little boy. They were still very, very young. And so she's bathing him, and, her suspicion even grew more because she saw that he was circumcised. So she says, now I have to get to the bottom of it. So she went one night, and she snuck into the cabinets where they keep all the files, and she searched those 3 kids, and she saw that they both had, Jewish ancestry. All 3 of them were Jewish. So she realized now, she was, gave up. She was so depressed from the loss of her husband. She says, okay, you know what? Now I have a will to survive. For the next 5 years during the war, her sole mission was to watch over these 3 kids. She watched over as if they were her own children, and her goal was, after the war, to get them out. Now, after the war finished, she went and she went over to the Jewish Aid Society that was setting up over there, and said, listen, this is my situation. I got 3 Jews over here in the Christian orphanage. Can you help me get them out? And they were like, listen, we just set up over here. We don't know how to deal with the situation right now. But, meanwhile, stay over there. Continue doing what you're doing, and we'll try to work something out. So she's staying over there as a few months go by, and then suddenly they get around to it, and they send this delegation basically to this Christian orphanage to say, listen, we came to the realization that there's 3 Jews over here by the name of, give them the same names, and we're here to take them back home to Israel. So the orphanage completely denies. Says, what are you talking about? We don't have any Jews over here. Absolutely not. They're all Christian over here. And so they saw that didn't work, so they tried to bribe them. They tried to offer them substantial amounts of money. They said, there's no Jews over here. I don't know what you guys are talking about. They would refuse to do it. So when they realized that it was a dead end, so they send this to the Haganah. They send it to Israel and says, listen, our hands are tied. Maybe you guys could do something about it. So this is where Daniel and Mordechai came into play. So they briefed from the society over here, the Jewish Aid Society. They briefed, they said, listen, there's going to be 2 people come in pretending to be British, editors. What are they called? Not editors, whatever. Journalists. Thank you. So the 2 British journalists, they come in, and you go and they'll set up with you for the extraction and everything that you need to do. So she said, fine. They get the date, and Mordechai and Daniel, they arrive, they land, they go straight to the orphanage. When they get into the orphanage, they go, the director over there is going, and he's giving them the tour. He's going, come on, you're going to get it in the paper now. He's giving the tour, and this is what we do over here, this is what we do here. Meanwhile, they're just scanning the entire area, for routes of escape and how to plan it. So, which is what some people do also on dates. So, they go, and they are, as they're walking through, they see, Daniel goes, and he stops, he sees a girl in the corner, a blonde lady in the corner, immersed in reading a book. And he freezes, and he starts tensing up. And, his partner over there, Mordechai, sees him, and he says, yo, you all right? You're cool? What's going on? And, he's like frozen, and he's like, that woman over there. And he's like, what about her? And he's like stammering, he's like, that's my wife. And he's like, are you sure? He's like, she lost a lot of weight. It's been 5 years, but that's my wife. And he's like, so he quickly, all right, they quickly told the director, all right, we'll get back to you. And they, rendezvoused at a different point in time. And they said, listen, we can't just go over and tell her, hey, listen, your husband is right here. Because she's going to flip out. She's going to jeopardize the whole mission. So Mordechai said, listen, I'm going to go meet with her. You stay out of this. I'll let her know the extraction time, and we'll deal with the debt. And he says, fine. So he goes over and to her, he's dealing with soldiers, men that have been at war for like 6-7 years, don't have the same sense of abilities, they realize enough that we can't tell her straight away. But they didn't realize is that he basically walked into her when she was basically saying a story to the entire class. And he goes over to her and he whispers in her ear. And he says, listen, we're the 2 journalists, 2 a.m. tonight. So she nods her head, and then he says one more thing, and then he says, by the way, he says, your husband's still alive, and he's here. And her entire face freezes. Her entire emotions, her entire eyes swell up. But she was like hard, she was good. She was solid, and she was like, she nods her head, and she's of course, I don't know if he said be cool, but it was something along those lines, like be cool. So and she's like, she nods her head, and she was good. She went right back on to reading. She went right back on to reading to the class. So 2 a.m. Comes, and suddenly she goes out. She goes a few minutes before 2. She goes out, and she sees, it scares her now. All of a sudden, there's a guard that's standing by the door. So the guard says, Miss Eliza, it's like, well, what you doing so late at night? Aren't you tired? He says, why don't you go to sleep? And says, I have a terrible headache. I just want to get out, get some fresh air. Maybe it'll, clear my mind. He's like, oh yeah, of course. He tips his hat to her. Enjoy your walk. So she walks right outside, and she sees there are 2 men standing in the corner over there. And they sort of pretend, no connection. So far, they completely ignored each other. And they said, she said, listen, there is a guard over here by the door. We have to do something about it. So they pretended to be drunk, these 2 guys. And she runs over to the guard and says, listen, can you help us? I was walking over here, and one of these guys, is like seriously drunk. Can you help them bring them inside over here? So the guard says, yeah, of course. So he goes out, and one guy was pretending to be extremely drunk. That was Daniel, her husband, and the other guy, Mordechai, was the guy who was, tipsy, but still, more or less sober. And they go over to this, he goes over, and so Mordechai holds him by one hand, the other guy holds him, the guard holds him by the other hand, and they start making the way back up the stairs. And they put him down, they sit him down by the chair over there. And Mordechai says, thank you so much. I appreciate you helping my friend. He said, here, maybe you want a swig of my whiskey. So the guard was like, only too happy to oblige. He's like, yeah, of course. He goes and he takes one big, chug down. And a few seconds later, he's sleeping like a baby on the floor. And they both go get up and they walk in. And he says, "Don't worry." He says, "We have enough medicine in there to keep them asleep for a very long time." So they go inside. They get the kids, and within like 2 minutes, like good special ops. You do that. You're in and out. They were like in and out within two. She had everything packed, everything prepared. Within 2 minutes, they were already out with the 3 kids in a car that was running around the corner. And so Eliza sat back with the 3 children, and they too sat up on the front. Mordechai was driving. Daniel was in the passenger seat. The entire ride, they didn't even let their emotions get it because they had to focus on getting out of the border before they're able to go and make sure that they're clear. But the entire time, he turned around and he was just staring at his wife without a word, and she was staring at him, and just like tears just dripping down. Finally, after a few hours, they were able to cross the border.
It's not humane.
This whole Nazi Germany was not humane. So they go and they after they get across the border, they were in a plane within a few hours. After they crossed the border, they were able to actually fully show the emotions. They were able to actually fully connect and explain of what actually happened, what went on. These So obviously they were happily married and they stayed together, but unfortunately they were not able to have any children still. But they did adopt these 3 children and raise them as their own. And they had an unbelievable, fascinating, crazy, unbelievable marriage. And this is something that, what's true love? True love is even when the connection is severed and that it's still not there anymore, but the drive to be together, the drive to just want the other person so strongly is still there that they were able to continue right where they left off. Where did this all strive from? The fact that they were able to go and give. They went and they constantly gave to each other. It wasn't a selfish relationship. It was a relationship of giving. I'm sorry, I know it's running late. Give me a few more minutes and we're almost done. The Vilna Gaon says, what? Good. The Vilna Gaon goes like this, and he says, what is the ultimate purpose of marriage? He says, until the husband and wife create an emotional bond between them that's strong enough to make them feel like a single organism, the marriage did not fulfill its purpose, because the purpose is to make you feel united as one. Says the Vilna Gaon, he says originally man was created one. Man and woman were created back to back. Then they were separated. They were split into 2. He says, why? Why couldn't God just originally create 2 separate people? Why did he have to create them together, to separate them, only to bring them back together again? Says the Vilna Gaon, explains this fascinating. He says that man was, what were we created? To worship God. But how are you going to go and worship God? The first step in to be able to worship somebody else is to able to stop worshiping yourself. And that's the first step. And it says the bond between a man and a woman is able to reach that purpose of creation. Because when you are married, when you have this emotional connection, you're able to go and you're able to stop thinking about yourself for a moment and think about somebody else. Once you have that ability, now you have that ability to go and continue to serve God in the way that you're supposed to serve God. I want to finish off with one final story, that there was once a divorced woman, and this divorced woman, her name was Chevy. She lived in Manchester, England. Anybody who knows Manchester, England, it's you see the sunshine there maybe about 4-5 hours a year, right? It's like never. It's like always cloudy, always rainy. Ask anybody from Manchester, it'd be like, "Have you seen the sun?" It'd be like, "The bloody sun! I've never seen it." You know. So it's always rainy. It's always. So she lived over here, and he goes and she had a very, very bitter divorce with her ex, and besides that, her ex was very abusive and it was a very terrible situation. They got divorced, and to make matters even worse, she was originally from New York, but her ex, being that she had 2 kids, she had 2 girls, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, he says, "You're not leaving England." He like forbid her from, like, he somehow legally made it that she's not allowed to leave England, so she can't even go back home. She was stuck in England, and she had this job that wasn't obviously making too much money, and the problem was that her boss, was going through some hard times, and he hasn't paid her in quite some time. And he kept on apologizing to her. "Listen, I'm trying, I'm working hard. Hopefully this thing's going to go through. I'll be able to pay you for everything that you work." And she was in a dilemma. She says, "What am I supposed to do?" It says, "I'm technically working for free, but at the same point, I could go find a job somewhere else." But he was so good to her that if she needed to go, she was a single mother. If she needed to go and pick up the kids or leave early or not able to make it one day, he was very, very considerate. So she was, stuck between 2 worlds and not sure what to do. And she stayed working for him, but it was getting extremely, extremely difficult because no money was coming in, and her funds, rent was due, the fridge was empty, the freezer was empty, the pantry was empty, and besides that, her husband was also delinquent on the child support. He wasn't paying anything. So, it was getting, very, very, serious. And her mother calls her out from New York and says, "Listen, Shavuot is coming up. Why don't you come home? Come home for Shavuot." And she says, "Listen, Mom," he says, "I would love to come home." He says, "What? The only way I'm coming home is if I'm coming home alone. I'm leaving my 2 kids over here, and I'm not doing that." And, so she went, generally in this point in time, she went through her usual routine, which was, work, come home, cry, deal a little something with it, then cry some more, and then go through it. So she was going through a daily routine. She was crying, and and unfortunately, her kids, they got used to this routine. It came close, to Shavuot, and she arranged, being that she didn't really have any food in the house, she arranged that she was going to eat a few meals by her best friend, and another meal she was going to eat by the rabbi's house. So, it's the day before Shavuot. She gets a call from her best friend, and she says, "Listen, that she's going to the meals." And he says, "Listen, something terrible came up." She says, her father, her best friend's father-in-law, just fell down and broke like a hip or something like that. And he says the whole family is going to be with him over there, so we're not going to be home for Shavuot. He says, "I'm so sorry. I know you're coming to me for a lot of meals. I'm not going to be home." She says, "But if you want, I could find you another meal that you could go to, because I really feel bad. I'm canceling you last minute." So being that she says, "Nah," she says, "Don't worry about it. I have so many people I could go to. You go take care of your husband. Go take care of your husband's father." He says, "I'll be okay." And she didn't want to be like one of these pity cases, but really she had nobody else to go to. She had nobody else to go to. She had no ability to actually even pay for Shavuot. She had no idea what she's going to do. She hangs up the phone and pretends like everything is okay. But then she went right back into bawling, into crying, and literally not knowing how she's going to make Shavuot. And her mother calls her back up again. You know how it is, so she had to do the, get that whole, I'm not even crying, I didn't just wake up, I was up all the whole time, so it's like, how the people, So she's getting through the whole thing. She calls up, "Hi, Ma, how's everything? Everything is great." One thing she did not want to be one of the sorry cases. And she says, "Everything is great, we're preparing for Shavuot, it's going to be amazing, don't worry about me." And she goes and she hangs up, right back into crying. So she realizes, she opens the freezer. She sees she has one frozen package of chicken cutlets. She takes it out, says, I don't know how this is going to be ready. She opens up the fridge. She has some knishes over there. And then she goes into the pantry. She found 1 can of mushrooms. And she says, "This is, somehow this is not even good enough for 1 meal, but somehow this is going to have to last for 3 meals for Shavuot." And then she decides, she says, "Listen, I need to go buy some challah." So she goes and she tells the kids, "Come on, let's go. We're going bye-bye. Put on your boots and raincoats, and we're going out." And she opens up her purse. She has 2.5 pounds over there, which is the money currency, whoever's not familiar in England. And she says, she's thinking, she's doing her mental, this is all the money she has left. She's like, what am I, says, I could possibly buy maybe 2 medium-sized challahs and also maybe a treat for the kids. So she goes out, And she walks into the supermarket, and she goes and she looks around, and she sees how, she takes, little wagon, and she sees how people are pushing these big wagons, are literally filling up their carts, and she passes, she goes to the bakery section, which she needs to buy the challahs, and she sees over there the cheesecakes, and her mouth starts watering, and she says, oh, what I would do to have just a slice of a cheesecake right now. And she's looking at other people, and she says, do they even know? Like, they're piling up all these things, and they didn't even know, and she takes 2 little medium challahs and a little box of cookies and says, this is all I have for Shavuot. And says, do they even care? And then of course she starts saying, she says, of course they would care if I would actually say, but she didn't want to be that petty case. And she goes and she does her little mental math to see how much everything is going to cost, make sure she has enough money, and she realizes she's going to be a few cents over. So she goes and she takes the cookies and puts it back. And meanwhile, the kids start crying. They're hungry. They didn't get anything since breakfast. So she takes the cookies back and she changes the medium challah for a small challah. She goes and she waits online. And she goes over there, and as they get their turn, she pays, she gets a few cents back in change, and she makes her way out. Now it started raining again, so they're sort of rushing through the streets to make it home to get at least wet as possible. And there was as they were turning a corner, it was a very fancy, expensive car that goes and drives very, very close to the curb and like splashes like the entire puddle right all over all 3 of them. And from the shock that she just got like basically showered with mud, she dropped the paper bag of challahs, and they ripped and they started rolling into the mud. And this car just goes and zooms away. And she goes on the floor, she quickly tries to salvage the 2 challahs, and she sees over there, it's like, it's muddy, and she's like wiping it away. And then this is like her breaking point. She sat on the floor and she just started crying. She just started crying in the street, in the middle of the floor, holding her 2 challahs. And she goes and she looks up, and she looks up to God, and she starts talking to God. And she says, God, why? Why me? She goes and she says, and she goes to her, and she started getting really angry. And then she calmed herself down, and she says, listen, I know you care about me, I know you love me, and even though it's hard for me to see that right now, I would just want you to know I love you too. But right now, I need you. Please help me and my children. And suddenly, apparently the guy who drove like a maniac, or passed by her, I guess he realized something was happening, so he drove around the block. And now he sees her sitting on the floor, crying, holding 2 challahs. He's in his mind, he's like, I probably hit her. So he quickly, jumps out, he pulls the car in the park, jumps out and be like, ma'am, are you okay? I'm so sorry, I didn't realize it. He's like, is everything okay? And she starts crying, she's like hysterical. She's like, you ruined my challahs, you ruined my challahs. And he's like, but are you okay? And she's like, she gets up and she's like, you ruined my, he's like, I'm sorry. He said, come into my car. He's like, I feel terrible. Jump into my car, I'll take you back to the store, we'll get you new challahs. And she's like, you don't understand. She starts crying, and she starts literally opening up now all of a sudden. She's like, I have no money to go back to the store. Says, this is the last money that I had in my bank account that I was able to spend for these 2 challahs. So the guy feels terrible, says, don't worry about it. Come into the car, it's on me. Feeling that she doesn't have any other option, she sits in the car, in the backseat with the 2 kids, and continues to cry. And he goes around the block, pulls into the supermarket parking lot, and they go in. He says, listen, take a cart, take whatever you need for Yom Tov. It's on me, don't worry about it. And she goes and she takes a cart, he also takes a cart. And she's like, she feel bad. She first goes and gets her 2 challahs back. Says, listen, that's all he really owes me. But he says, listen, anything that you need, you could take for that. So, she doesn't want to be a pity case. She says, listen, he did really, almost hit me. Okay, fine. So she goes, but she only puts in the bare minimum. Only the bare minimum. She starts packing it. Meanwhile, she sees I guess he took the opportunity also to do the shopping, because he's literally putting in everything. And then they get passed by the cheesecakes again. And she sees he takes 4 different cheesecakes. And she's like, oh, maybe I should take a cheesecake. He's like, no, you know what? No, only the bare minimum. I'm not taking anything more than I need to. He's ready to do me a favor. And she walks right past by the cheesecake. And they get she gets everything that she needs, the bare minimum that she needs. She walks up to the checkout counter. As they get to the checkout counter, she puts her thing on the conveyor belt. He puts his stuff on the conveyor belt, and she puts the divider, right in between, this is mine. And he says, no, don't worry about it. He takes out the divider, and he goes over to the cashier and says, for delivery, please. And she says, so she goes over, she says, yeah, this is mine, and this is, and he's like, no, whole thing, delivery, please. And so her eyes are starting to water now, and she's like, you don't have to, I appreciate it. And he goes and he says, what's the address? So he cuts her off, her benefactor, and he says, listen, give her your address. He wants her address. So she gives him the address, and they ring everything up. He gives the credit card, he pays for everything. And she, on the entire way back to the car, she's like, thank you so much. You don't know what this means. You literally saved my life. I don't know what I would have done for Shavuot. And he says, don't worry about it. It's my pleasure. I feel so bad what I did to you. I hope you can forgive me. I feel terrible. I was in a rush. I am so sorry. And she's like, well, you have nothing to be sorry about. He says, you could do this every week if you want. Not a problem. And it's totally fine. So she goes and she sits back in the car and, she felt like very vulnerable at this point in time, and she basically opened up to him. Says, "Listen, you don't understand like what I'm going through. I'm a single mother with 2 kids. My husband divorced me, whatever, abusive, the whole shebang. No money, no boss, nothing like that." And he's like, so he turns around to her as they pull up to her apartment, and he says, I never got your name. What's your name? So she says, my name is Chevy Stein. He says, so he pulls out his little book and he writes something on it, and he folds it up. And he gives it to her, and he says, listen. And he says, enjoy the holiday and remember to smile. You're a mother of 2 beautiful children. They deserve a happy childhood. And she says, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Tears in her eyes. I don't know how I could ever thank you. He says, don't worry about it. She takes a piece of paper, and I don't know what it was, and she goes out and she watches her benefit, her lifesaver basically just drive away. And she sees the page, she remembers the paper, she opens it up. She sees there's a check made out to Chevy Stein for £50,000, and she starts crying again. Like, oh, this, she's like every. So the kids realize that this is a different cry than the usual cry. They were like, so they were like, "Mummy, why are you crying?" So she said, "Mommy's crying right now because she's so happy." And she says, "Come, let's go in. We have to get ready for Shavuot." And so she got in and she started, getting ready for Shavuot. This is the first time she was actually able to fill up her fridge and her freezer. And Baruch Hashem, it went unbelievable. She had a great Shavuot. That next Friday, she on her door was hanging 6 challahs with a note there that says, you don't have to worry about having challahs anymore. And this started coming on a weekly basis. On a weekly basis, every time came challahs, and occasionally came also along with a check as well. And so after this was going for some sort of time, she goes over to the bakery and says, "Listen, I don't even know who he is." He says, "I want to thank him." He says, "Can you please let me know who this is so I could go and thank him?" So they said, "Listen, it's customer. We have the policy. We can't just give over anything." And so she thinks, says, "You know what? Could I give you a letter and you could give it over to him?" He says, "Yeah, not a problem." So the kids started writing letters. Thank you so much to our dear lifesaver, and they draw pictures. And they, every so often they would bring it to the bakery, and the bakery would deliver it to this benefactor. And this went on for quite a few months. And they kept on constantly sending in, letters and sending in this. And she said, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate it." And then came time for Purim. So Purim came along, and she goes over to the bakery and says, "Listen," I still don't know who he is. We want to make him a beautiful mishloach manot. He literally saved us. He says, "Can you please ask him?" He says, if it's okay, if we could have his address so that we could actually go and deliver this mishloach manot to him. So he says, "Fine, I'll ask him." So a few days later, she gets a letter in the mail, and this is the first letter that she ever got, and it's from her benefactor. And she goes over, and the letter says to be like, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I really don't need anything." He says, "To be honest, I didn't even realize you didn't even have my address, because the bakery just mailed it out to me. I thought it was coming, I didn't even put the 2 and 2 together." He says, "But if you want, by all means, I'm having a Purim Suda at my house, a Purim party. Why don't you come and bring the kids also for the Purim party?" She says, "Perfect, excellent, perfect timing, because she's going to go. She's going to be able to go and deliver also the Mishloach Manot, and now she has also a place to go." So she goes, and they have this... Purim comes, the kids get dressed up, they make this beautiful mishloach manot, and they make their way to this guy, this wealthy guy's house. They get over to the wealthy guy's house, and he welcomes him in, and she just hands him the mishloach manot. And this is the first time seeing him since the last time that he was a bit older than her, but it's the first time seeing him since all that he did for her. And she couldn't even say anything. She just started crying, and so he goes over to the kids and he says, "Come, I want to show you something." And so all 4 of them go walk into the kitchen. The entire fridge is pasted with all their letters they ever sent to him from the beginning until end. And he goes over to the 2 kids and he says, "Listen," he says, "you might not know me," he says, "but I know you very, very well." And he says, he knew, called him by name. He says, you're going to sit over here, you're going to sit over there. And he says, how's school? And he started asking him all these questions. And this just made her cry even more. She was just like, she's like, she's like, thank you so much. It's like, listen, don't worry about it. It's all okay. And, as, the meal went on, she was able to get in control of her emotions. And, she noticed that, there was a bunch of older people on the meal, but she didn't see his wife. And she saw pictures of kids on the wall, but she didn't see any kids either. So she goes afterwards, as they're about to leave, and they say, where's your wife and kids? I wanted to thank your wife also for everything you did. So he says, to be honest, says my wife no longer lives here. He says, says we got divorced a few years back. He says, I became a Baal Tshuva, and I became religious, and she had nothing. She had no interest to do with that. I have kids that are quite older already, and they either didn't want to have anything to do with it. So I only see them really when they come for money. But other than that, I don't really see them. So she says, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. He says, no, don't worry about it. It's okay, don't worry about it. So she goes home, and a few weeks later, she gets another invitation. She says, why don't you we don't live too far, why don't you come over for a Shabbat meal? So she started coming over for a Shabbat meal, and this went on for quite some time. Then one day, her benefactor, his name is Adam, comes over to her, and he says, listen, and he goes over there and says, listen, I don't want to make anything weird or anything like that, but, he says, and no matter what happens, he says, know that you'll constantly and you'll always have my support, and you'll always, I feel like this, these children, I have a strong connection to them, you will always get those challahs, you will always get the money, but maybe I could, take you out one time for dinner, just you, and not the kids. So, and he's starting to stammer, and he's starting to, mutter, and he's starting to, turn red. And he says, but it's okay, he's like, it's okay, I understand, I'm a little bit older, it's fine, it's all okay. And she's like, Adam, what she says with a smile, says, I would love it. And so they went and they started, they started to date, and 4 months later they were married. 4 months later they were married, and she finishes the story with this note. And I want to read you this note. And this note is like this. It says, one Erev Shavuot, I thought, Hashem, I thought you'd forsaken me. I thought you forgot about me, but you never forget. As a father never forgets a child. And today I am ever so grateful that my best friend canceled on me, that my ex didn't let me leave the country, that my boss didn't pay me, and that I used my last few dollars to buy those 2 challahs, which got ruined. And today I am happier than I ever thought I would ever be in my life. Thank you, Hashem. I love you too. That was signed by her. It says, no matter what happens in life, we have to realize that no matter what happens, God loves us as a father loves a child. And the formula is very, very simple. It's in Pashut B'Chukotai. It says the formula for a happy and successful life is very simple. If you follow my laws, if you follow my Torah, I have guidelines. There are things that you need to do. For a woman, there's tzniut, there's Shabbat, there's kosher, there's things that you need to do. If you follow that, then you'll have material prosperity. You'll have success in everything that you do. But if you don't, then it goes to the Torah. The Pasha goes on and gives harsh rebuke for people that don't follow the Torah. It says, but know that all this comes from love. Everything comes from love. The question is, how do you want to be a recipient of this love? Do you want it to come as a wake-up call, or do you want to come as a nice and beautiful way? The idea is that we have to make our love unconditional. This is our love between our spouses, our love between our friends. It has to be unconditional because that is true love. When you have unconditional love, then eventually you can be able to have this unconditional love for God. How do people, unfortunately, when they become Baal Tshuva, when they become religious, what do they think right away? Okay, listen, God, I became religious. Generally, some people, unfortunately, why do they become religious? They go and, let's say they have a problem with parnasah. They can't make money. So, they tried business, they tried school, they tried this, they tried anything else. So nothing else worked. Let me try God for a little bit. Let me see, maybe this will work out. So they go and they say, listen, God, I've been keeping Shabbat, I've been keeping kosher. Where's my money? Come on, let me see a rain. It's like, I don't see it. This is what. So they're coming in. That's conditional love. When you're doing something for God, it should be unconditional. God works measure for measure. You want Him to give you prosperity unconditional. Look at Pasha B'Chukotai. You go for Him, He is going to do for you, and He could do a lot more than you can do anything for Him. And in fact, you never do anything for Him. You're doing only for yourself. There's a midrash, a very, very short story. We're going to end with this. Very short story in midrash, I believe in Shir HaShirim, that a woman was married for many years and they did not have any children. So they went over to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and they asked him, it says, he wanted to basically divorce her because the halacha is if a woman, you're married for a long time, you don't have any children, a man is obligated to have children, and you have the ability to go divorce her and marry somebody else. So he says, yes, you can get divorced, but you should make a celebration. Because you're doing this for God. Just like you got married in joy, so too you're doing this for God, you should do it in joy. So fine, they did. They listened to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They went and they made a great feast. And the husband, everybody was in a good mood. The husband goes over to his soon-to-be ex-wife, and he says, listen, he says, I really care about you, I really love you, I really appreciate everything. He says, and from that, he was a very wealthy man. Anything that you want from my house, take to your father's house, and it's yours to keep. He says, you can take anything that you want, my gratitude to you, take it and it's yours. So she goes and she feeds him a little bit more wine, and he falls asleep. He falls asleep, and she goes and she calls her servants, and he says, bring him to my father's house. He wakes up the next morning, and he's like, this is not my bed. He's like, what's going on over here? And he turns over and he sees his wife. It was supposed to be, they're supposed to be getting divorced. And not ex-wife, yeah. He says, what's going on over here? And she says, you told me I could take whatever I want from your house. And he says, I only want one thing, and that I want you. And he says, I will never be able to live happily without you. And so he was so emotional from that. He goes and he says, they didn't get divorced. They didn't get divorced. They got married, and later they actually went and they did have a kid. They did have a child from that.
That's the best part. That is the best part.
When there's something that, there's a bracha in the house. We're finishing with this. There's a bracha in the house when you have shalom. When you have peace in the house, when you have happiness in the house, there's blessing in the house. You want to get that blessing? This is the way to do it. It's the unconditional love. This is what we spoke about. That you have to, if you really want to love somebody, whether it's your children, whether it's whatever it is, your spouse, and most importantly, between you and God, the love should be unconditional. No matter what happens, you're going to love God. No matter what God throws in you, I'm going to love you. This is just like the story with the Holocaust. You can take away anything. No matter what, I love you unconditionally. This is the idea. And B'ezrat Hashem, may we have the merit to have this true love, this ahava, that's going to be shelot lo yabdavar, something that is unconditional, not only between our spouses, between our children, between ben adam lechavero, and most importantly, between us and God. Zakabo. Any questions? All right, so excellent question. The question is what about the love for oneself? Now, this is extremely, extremely important, because if you don't love yourself, you cannot love anybody else. So the fundamental, you have to have a love of yourself. Now, this is very, very different with a strong ego or high ego that all I care about is myself, and that is nothing, else. That is a very, very detrimental, especially in relationships. It's going to go bad. The important is that you have to have a high self-esteem. You have to realize, you have to appreciate who you are, and you have to realize you have some self-worth. The problem is that many people nowadays don't think that they're worth anything. And if you don't think you're worth anything, it says, you have to love somebody else like your friend. What happens if you don't love yourself? So what, you're going to love your friend not like you love yourself? So it is very, very imperative that you go and you love yourself. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you go shopping for yourself and you go spend all the money for yourself. That means that you have a healthy self-respect of yourself and realize that you are a daughter of God and that you have this unbelievable potential of who you are, no matter what mistakes you did in your life. And no matter how much you fell, you have the ability to overcome it all and become great. And when you believe that, then you start loving yourself, and B'ezrat Hashem, you'll be able to also love other people. That's the thing. If you want to have children that have high self-esteem, the number one thing is the children see about the parents. The children are able to see if the parents have a low self-esteem, what's going to be for the children. Any other questions? Nothing. Chazak Baruch.